The walls of the house stood tall and silent, their gray stones sucking the color out of everything that passed through them. Luma had lived within those walls for as long as she could remember. Her feet had grown on those cold floors, her eyes had memorized the cracks in the ceilings, and her soul had long since learned the rhythm of fear. There were rules in Mama Duru's house, unwritten, unspoken, but sharper than any whip. No laughter. No loud voices. No mirrors. No joy. Luma didn't remember her real mother's face. She only had fragments, warm hands braiding her hair, the scent of cinnamon, a voice humming lullabies to the beat of her heartbeat. But that life had ended like a candle in a storm, snuffed out without warning. Her father remarried shortly after, and then one day he too left on a trading voyage and never returned. From then on, Mama Duru's word became law. The house changed. Curtains were drawn tight even in daylight, muting the sun to a pale whisper. The bright rugs were rolled away and stored in the attic. Mama Duru replaced them with woven mats so dull they looked like woven shadows. Flowers were torn from the garden, and Luma's laughter was the first thing to be buried. The day she giggled at a butterfly landing on her nose, Mama Duru slapped her so hard her ear rang for hours. "Foolishness is a disease," she said coldly. "Joy is for weak minds." Luma had learned to swallow her laughter that day. She was not alone in the house. Her stepsisters Aini and Kula thrived in the silence not because they liked it but because they learned how to manipulate it. They whispered lies to Mama Duru when Luma was caught humming to herself or smiling at her reflection in a spoon. They twisted joy into rebellion, and Mama Duru believed every word. "Why are you smiling?" Mama Duru would bark, her voice like a slap. "Do you think this is a place for smiles?" The mirror in the hallway had been covered in a black cloth since the day her father left. Luma once tried to peek beneath it just to remember what she looked like. The moment she lifted a corner of the cloth, Mama Duru appeared as if summoned by the act itself. "You think you are beautiful?" she growled. "You think vanity will feed you?" The slap that followed left more than a sting. It left a bruise shaped like a question. Who was she if she could never see her own face? So Luma grew quiet. She learned how to cry without sound. How to smile with her eyes downcast. How to bury feelings in the space between her heartbeats. She walked like a shadow and spoke like a whisper. But inside her, something remained stubbornly alive. A spark. A longing. She would sneak to the kitchen before dawn, where the only light came from the moon filtering through the window. There, in the reflection of the water jug, she would catch glimpses of herself, half-face, blurred and distorted. Enough to know she still existed. Enough to know she still had eyes that remembered laughter, lips that wanted to sing. In the market, other children played and shouted and ran barefoot through puddles. Luma watched them from behind Mama Duru's back, her fingers twitching with the urge to join. But even the thought of joy had become dangerous. Sometimes she wondered if her silence was a kind of armor or a prison. At night, she dreamed of laughing out loud, of running until her legs gave out, of seeing her reflection in a river, not with shame but with wonder. She dreamed of mirrors that spoke back with kindness, of voices that weren't scolded into stillness. One day, a traveling merchant passed through the village selling hand mirrors carved from wood and polished to shining clarity. Luma's heart beat faster just seeing them. She reached out just to touch one, but before her fingers could make contact, Mama Duru's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Leave it. Do you want to lose that hand?" The merchant looked at Luma with quiet sorrow. "A girl must know her face," he said gently, "or others will tell her what she is." Mama Duru bought nothing and dragged Luma away by the wrist. That night, the old ache in her chest returned, loneliness shaped like a cage. But this time, something new pulsed beneath it, defiance. She sat alone in her corner room, listening to the house breathe around her. Even the walls seemed tired of silence. Somewhere far off, a flute was playing. Someone was celebrating. Somewhere laughter echoed. And Luma, despite herself, smiled. A tiny trembling smile, but real. And in the stillness of her heart, it echoed louder than any slap ever could. Luma's fingers trembled as she brushed aside a tattered sheet, revealing the long-forgotten mirror beneath it. The attic groaned around her, the wind slipping through the rafters like a ghost's breath. The mirror's glass was fractured, veins of silver cracks running through it like ancient lightning, but still, it held a strange, beckoning glow. She had only come up to the attic to escape the noise of Mama Duru's complaints and her stepsister's endless mockery. They didn't know she often crept away to this dusty world of trunks and shadows, where the air smelled of cedar and thyme. Tonight, the storm had rattled something loose, a sense of urgency she didn't understand. Her eyes, wide and curious, scanned the dim space until the mirror had drawn her in like a magnet. It wasn't an ordinary mirror. She bent over it hesitant. For a long moment she saw only her own eyes staring back, hollowed by loneliness, wide with the hunger for something unnamed. Then something flickered behind the glass. Not behind her in the attic, within the mirror itself. A woman's face. Kind eyes. Familiar. Mother? Luma whispered, her breath fogging the broken surface. The voice came so faintly she thought at first it was the storm outside. But no, the name echoed from inside the mirror. Luma? She gasped and backed away. Her heel caught on a loose floorboard and she stumbled to the ground. The attic creaked louder, but the mirror remained still. Her heart pounded in her chest like a drum calling the dead. The voice had sounded like wind and warmth and love, all braided together. It couldn't be. Her mother had died when she was very young, or so she had always been told. There were no portraits, no keepsakes, no lullabies. Only Mama Duru's iron rules and cold discipline. But that face, it was real. Somewhere deep in her bones she remembered that smile. She crawled closer again, reaching out this time. Her fingers brushed the edge of the mirror's wooden frame. "Are you there?" she whispered. A shimmer rippled across the cracked surface like a pebble dropped in a still pond. Her reflection blurred, then returned. This time it wore a different expression, soft, sad but smiling. A smile she hadn't allowed herself in years. She reached up and traced her lips in the mirror. The forbidden expression. The thing Mama Duru hated the most. Just then the attic door creaked open below. "Luma." Mama Duru's voice thundered up the stairs. Panic surged in Luma's chest. She covered the mirror again with the dusty sheet, heart hammering. She raced down the attic ladder just as her stepmother's shadow appeared at the bottom. "What were you doing up there?" Mama Duru's tone was sharp, her eyes narrowed. "I was only cleaning," Luma lied, lowering her eyes. Mama Duru stepped closer and slapped her across the face, hard and sudden. "You're smiling again," she hissed. "What did I tell you about that?" "I wasn't." Luma tried to speak but the pain silenced her. "Do you think this is a house of joy?" Mama Duru spat. "You will not dishonor this home with laughter or vanity." Luma bowed her head. But the image of her mother lingered behind her eyelids. That voice. That warmth. The mirror had cracked something open, not just in glass but inside her too. Her silence wasn't safety anymore. It felt like a cage. That night, long after the household slept, Luma slipped back into the attic. She lit a small candle and sat before the mirror again. The woman in the glass was waiting for her. "You're real," Luma whispered. "I am," said the voice more clearly this time. "And you must remember what they've made you forget." The mirror pulsed faintly, illuminating more than just Luma's face. A rush of memories poured through her like wind through open doors. Her mother singing, brushing her hair, whispering stories of women who shaped rivers and spoke to stars. She remembered joy, laughter, magic. "You are not broken," the voice said. "But you must be brave." Luma placed her hand flat on the cracked surface. It was cold, but something inside her ignited, warm and fierce. "I want to remember everything," she said. The voice hummed with approval. "Then come back tomorrow. And bring the truth you've buried." The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows along the beams. Luma stood, steadier than she'd felt in years. For the first time since her mother vanished from her world, she felt more than longing, she felt purpose. Downstairs, Mama Duru stirred in her sleep, troubled by a dream she couldn't name. But in the attic, the mirror waited. And Luma, silent no longer, was ready to see all that had been hidden. The house held its breath that morning. Luma had risen early before the rooster's cry, before the light reached the cracked tiles of the courtyard. The air was still and heavy, like it always was before a storm, though not a single cloud marred the sky. She moved in silence, careful not to wake Mama Duru. Her bare feet patted softly across the cold stone floor as she made her way to the back of the kitchen where the overripe guavas grew through the cracked wall. It was the only place the house hadn't managed to choke completely. As she reached up to pick the fruit, a tune escaped her lips. It wasn't a song she remembered learning, just something that stirred in her chest and came out in a soft, almost childlike hum. It was the kind of sound a girl might make if she thought no one was listening. A soft, lilting tune. Wordless. Gentle. She didn't know she was smiling until she heard the door creak. Mama Duru's shadow stretched across the courtyard like a wound. Her eyes, sharp and sunken, locked onto Luma like a hawk spotting a trembling mouse. There was no scream, no shouted accusation. Mama Duru didn't raise her voice when she was truly angry. She didn't need to. She stepped forward. One step. Then another. Luma dropped the guava. It landed with a soft thud. Mama Duru stood before her now, towering, silent, filled with a rage that didn't burn but froze. And without warning, her hand moved. The slap was sudden. Not loud. Not even hard. But it was cold, so cold that it seemed to pull the warmth from Luma's skin. Her cheek stung with the chill of it. Not like fire but like ice that bites and burrows deep. Her head tilted slightly from the blow, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even breathe. The world seemed to shiver. Smiling like a fool, Mama Duru muttered. You think the world will reward you for joy? You'll learn. Then she turned and walked back inside. Luma stood frozen for several minutes. Her cheek throbbed, not from pain but from something deeper. The air around her felt wrong, like it had folded over itself. A humming silence rang in her ears, loud as thunder. And still she didn't cry. Later that night, long after the house had fallen into the usual uncomfortable hush, Luma climbed the creaking stairs to the attic. She wasn't sure why. Her legs carried her before her thoughts could form. Her fingers trembled on the old brass handle. The attic door groaned open like an old spirit sighing. The cracked mirror sat where she'd last left it, leaning against the far wall, cloaked in moonlight. Dust shimmered in the air. Luma approached it, half expecting her reflection to be gone or changed. But it was there, her face pale in the silver light, her hair tangled from the day's chores, her cheek still red where Mama Duru's hand had struck. She reached out and touched the mirror's surface. A warmth pulsed beneath her palm like a heartbeat. And then, faintly, a whisper. Your joy is power. The voice was soft, barely audible, like the rustle of dry leaves in wind. But it spoke directly into her bones. Luma pulled her hand back, startled but not afraid. The warmth remained in her fingers, pulsing. She looked into the mirror again. This time, behind her reflection, a flicker, barely visible, a shape forming in the cracked glass. It was a woman's face. Gentle. Familiar. Eyes like hers. Lips curled in a sorrowful smile. Mother? The word formed in Luma's mind but didn't leave her lips. The image faded as quickly as it appeared. But something remained, a feeling, a spark. That same hum she dared to sing that morning stirred again in her chest. She pressed her palm to her heart. It beat steady, defiant. As if her body was remembering something long forgotten. She left the attic that night with a strange calmness wrapped around her. Not peace exactly. Not joy. But a growing awareness. Of something buried deep and finally waking. The next day Luma was quieter than usual but not afraid. She went about her tasks with care, humming again though softer. Whenever Mama Duru passed she lowered her eyes. But inside she was humming louder. Each night she returned to the attic. Each night the mirror whispered more. Do not let them break your light. Joy is a rebellion. Laughter is not weakness, it's resistance. Luma didn't understand where the voice came from. Whether it was truly her mother's spirit or something older. Something woven into the mirror itself. All she knew was that it told her what no one ever had. That her happiness mattered. She began to test it. On the third day, while washing clothes in the back courtyard, she dipped her hand into the water and let herself giggle at how cold it was. Mama Duru didn't see. On the fourth she twirled once, just once, beneath the sun before returning to sweeping the floor. On the fifth she smiled at herself in the mirror, not a wide grin but a small one. Soft. Secret. And the mirror glowed. Not brightly. Just a faint shimmer, like moonlight on water. The voice didn't speak this time. It didn't need to. Luma began collecting little things. A button with a carved flower. A ribbon Mama Duru discarded. A pebble that shone in the sunlight. She hid them in a cloth pouch under her bed, her joy pouch she called it in her mind. Every time she added something she whispered, "This is mine." Because that was what Mama Duru had always denied her. Not food, not shelter, but ownership over her own feelings. She began noticing things too. How Mama Duru flinched when Luma stood tall. How the woman seemed smaller when Luma didn't cower. How the slap had not left a bruise, but instead had marked a turning point. Luma wasn't healed. She was blooming. One night, Mama Duru knocked on her door. Luma had been humming again, thinking no one would hear. The knock was harsh. Demanding. Luma froze. For a moment her old fears surged. But she stood. She opened the door. Mama Duru's face was a storm. You think I can't hear you? You think humming makes you special? You want to be like her, don't you? Luma blinked. Like who? Your mother. Always smiling like the world owed her something. Mama Duru's voice cracked. And look where it got her. Luma didn't speak. She just looked at the woman in front of her. For the first time really looked. Mama Duru's eyes were tired. Her shoulders hunched. And beneath her fury was something else, emptiness. "You can beat the smile off my face," Luma said softly, "but you can't make me forget what it feels like." Mama Duru raised her hand again, but something stopped her. Perhaps it was the way Luma didn't flinch. Or the way her eyes didn't fill with tears. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the mirror in the attic, pulsing with a light that grew stronger with every act of defiance. Mama Duru lowered her hand. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Luma stood in the doorway long after she'd gone, listening to the silence. But this time it wasn't oppressive. It was full of possibility. That night, as she touched the mirror once more, it didn't whisper. It sang. A low, melodic hum that echoed through the attic and into her bones. Luma closed her eyes and smiled. Not a secret smile. A full one. And this time the house didn't punish her. It listened. Luma made it a ritual. Every night, once the house had sunk into its grim silence and Mama Duru's footsteps faded into snores, she tiptoed to the attic. Her bare feet knew the creaking floorboards by heart now, and her hand no longer trembled when she touched the cold handle of the attic door. The mirror, still cracked, still dusty, waited for her like an old friend. She knelt before it and smiled. At first, her smile was shy, crooked, almost unsure. But as days passed, it widened, softened, bloomed like a wildflower. Each night, as she smiled at her reflection, she noticed something new. The mirror glowed faintly, a ripple of light behind the glass like water under moonlight. But more than that, her mother's face was beginning to return. The first time, it had only been a flicker, the curve of a cheekbone that wasn't hers, an eye that blinked a moment too late. Then as the nights passed, the image deepened. A full face emerged, not always clearly but enough. The woman in the mirror had soft, deep eyes like hers. A mouth made for laughter. And an expression that held fierce warmth. Luma didn't speak to it. She didn't need to. Her smiles were enough. One night, as she smiled longer than usual, a flower bloomed. It was faint at first, a scent sweet and unfamiliar. Then she saw it, a pale blossom opening on the windowsill, even though no soil was there, no pot, no seed she had planted. Just a wild, ghostly bloom with petals like starlight. Luma stared at it, heart thumping. She reached out and touched its cool velvet softness. The next night there were more. Tiny wildflowers spilled from the corners of the attic, blooming in clusters where her feet had walked, where her breath had warmed the air. Even the dust on the floor seemed to glow faintly, dancing when she smiled. She wasn't afraid. Felt right. Like the house, which had always choked on silence, was finally learning to breathe again. Her skin began to change too. Not suddenly. Not in a way anyone else would notice. But under moonlight, it shimmered. A soft, luminous sheen coated her arms and cheeks, like moonlight had soaked into her skin and refused to leave. She caught sight of herself in the cracked mirror, and for the first time in her life thought, I am not small. I'm not ugly. I'm not waste. She didn't know if the mirror was magic or if it had simply remembered her mother's love long after death. But it was clear now, this mirror was a bridge. A spirit link. Not just glass and reflection but memory. Energy. Connection. Her mother had poured something into it before she vanished. Love, maybe. Or a last breath. Or a spell shaped like hope. And now it was waking. One night, Luma asked the mirror a question. Not aloud, just in her heart. She wanted to know if her mother had meant to leave. If she'd abandoned her. If she'd truly died or if something more had happened. The mirror didn't answer with words. Instead, the attic filled with warmth, like hands gently pressing around her shoulders. The image of her mother grew brighter, her eyes softer. She smiled back. That was the answer. She had never been left. The magic had just been waiting for her to grow strong enough to find it. She began to smile during the day too, but only in small moments. A flicker when the sunlight caught her hand just right. A grin when Mama Duru scolded her and her voice cracked from strain. A smirk when a child in the street dropped a stone and it bounced in the shape of a heart. The smiles were hers now, hidden but blooming like wildflowers in her soul. And whenever she felt alone, the attic waited. Each night she smiled longer. Each night the flowers multiplied. And each night, the image of her mother grew more complete. Not just a face now, but shoulders, hands, the outline of robes stitched with patterns Luma didn't recognize but felt drawn to. Symbols curled in the air behind the reflection. Soft, glowing marks that pulsed like heartbeat language. Luma traced one with her fingertip. A warmth traveled through her arm. The mirror whispered, not in voice but in meaning. She couldn't explain it, but she knew her mother had been gifted. A keeper of old joy magic, a weaver of beauty in silence. And that magic had not died. It had simply fallen asleep in Luma, waiting to be awakened by something simple and fierce. A smile. From then on, Luma no longer feared Mama Duru's slaps. Because now she knew, those slaps were meant to silence something they didn't understand. But that something was bigger than fear. It was older than cruelty. It was joy born of defiance. And it bloomed in shadows. Luma had never meant to break the rule. It had just happened. A rare moment of warmth had slipped through the cracks of her silence, catching her unaware. She'd been in the courtyard, helping the youngest servant girl, Amari, untangle a bundle of firewood from a knotted rope. The child, barely 7, had whispered a silly joke about a lizard that wore shoes and slipped on mango peels. For the first time in months, maybe years, Luma had laughed. Not loud, not wild, but real. Her smile bloomed like a sunbeam between the gray stones of her face. And Mama Duru saw it. The air changed instantly. Luma had felt it before she saw her. The sharp slice of stillness, the way the birds stopped chirping. Mama Duru's shadow stretched long across the courtyard, swallowing the sunlight like a storm cloud. Her steps were slow, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. You dared, Mama Duru hissed, her tone cold as river bone. You dared to defy the law of this house. Luma tried to speak, to explain it was an accident, a flicker, nothing more. But her voice caught like a fishhook in her throat. Amari had already fled, her small feet padding away as if chased by thunder. Luma stood frozen, smile already vanished, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Mama Duru seized her by the wrist, fingers like iron. Without a word, she dragged Luma through the halls, past stone-faced servants and the oil lamp corridors. Up and up the stairs, to the attic door that had become too familiar. It opened with a groan and Luma was shoved inside. The lock clicked behind her. She sat in the dark for hours. The attic was silent, save for the storm outside, rain pelting the roof like thrown seeds. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. Her cheeks still burned from the shame. Why couldn't she have controlled it? Why let a child's joke steal her guard? But the mirror was waiting. In the far corner, it shimmered faintly. The crack across its glass glowed like a thread of silver fire. Luma crawled toward it, knees brushing the cold wood floor. She stared at her reflection. It was pale, worn. But behind it, her mother's face hovered like a ghost woven from moonlight. I'm sorry, Luma whispered. The mirror did not judge her. Instead, it pulsed softly as if breathing with her. Her mother's voice, calm and steady, spilled through the glass. You broke the rule. Good. Some rules are meant to be broken, especially the ones that were built to bury your light. Luma's lip trembled. She'll never forgive me. She'll never let me smile again. She fears what your smile can do. That's foolish, Luma said, wiping her face. It's just a smile. No, the voice replied gently. It is joy. And joy, when crushed and reclaimed, becomes power. The words clung to Luma's heart like dew on morning leaves. Was that what Mama Duru feared all along? That her joy wasn't weakness but something more dangerous? The attic was dark, but warmth spread through her palms. She looked down and gasped. Her fingertips glowed faintly as if holding captured starlight. The more she allowed the thought, the belief, that her happiness mattered, the brighter they grew. A tear welled up in her eye, trailing down her cheek and landing on the mirror's surface. The mirror shimmered. The long crack down its center sealed itself slowly, as if being stitched by invisible hands. Where the fracture had once marred the glass, now there was only smooth, polished silver. Luma blinked, and in the new, unbroken reflection, her mother appeared whole. Not just a faded spirit but a woman of strength, eyes like embers, smile proud. I am with you, the mirror said. Even in silence. Even in shame. But your smile is the key. It breaks chains. It frees stories trapped in shadows. Luma pressed her hand to the mirror, and warmth passed through the glass like a heartbeat. She felt herself stand taller, not from pride but from purpose. If her joy was rebellion, then she would wear it like armor. Outside, thunder cracked. Inside, in the locked attic, a girl began to understand her own power, not through anger, not through vengeance, but through a truth long denied. That joy, even in tiny doses, could shatter the longest curse. And downstairs, Mama Duru tossed in restless sleep, unaware that her control had already begun to slip through fingers clenched too tightly around fear. The mirror shimmered like moonlight on water, revealing shadows of the past. Luma sat in the attic, hands trembling in her lap as her mother's voice, soft as the wind, told her the story of the house. Long ago, before the walls grew cold and silent, Mama Duru had been a woman of grace. Her laughter was once as common as birdsong, her eyes full of dreams, her heart open. She had danced through the halls with light feet and brighter hopes. But something changed. The mirror showed Luma glimpses, images twisted like memories seen through smoke. There was a younger Mama Duru, smiling, holding a baby that could only be Luma. Beside her stood a man with warm eyes, Luma's father, long dead. Then came whispers of another woman, a rival perhaps, whose beauty turned heads and whose laughter made Duru's own feel small. Envy sprouted in her like a weed, slowly curling around her joy until it withered away. Luma's eyes widened as the mirror revealed the moment everything shifted. Mama Duru, standing before a mirror much like this one, muttered words soaked in bitterness. A curse. Not flung at another, but at herself. A desperate plea to never see happiness again if it meant always being second best. The mirror shattered. Her smile vanished. From that day forward, no laughter echoed in the house. No mirror reflected truth. She locked away all joy as if it were a dangerous thing, punishing anyone who dared to smile too freely, lest they remind her of what she had lost. Luma pressed her palm to the mirror, its surface warm. Why did she do it? She whispered. Because broken hearts can turn sharp, her mother's voice replied. But sharp things can still be softened. The house groaned around her, the wood moaning like it remembered being alive. Luma began to notice things she'd missed before. The paintings had all been turned to face the walls. The chandelier no longer sparkled. The music room's piano was covered in dust. Joy had been driven out not just from people but from the home itself. It was crumbling slowly, walls peeling, windows dulling, plants wilting, because a place without joy is like a body without a soul. She stood, her resolve blooming like the flowers that once returned to her room. She would not be silenced. Not anymore. The next morning Luma walked the halls with purpose. She greeted the servants with warmth, smiling freely, even if it trembled at the edges. Some recoiled out of fear, casting nervous glances toward Mama Duru. Others paused and blinked as if seeing her for the first time. The old gardener, stooped and quiet for years, chuckled when Luma handed him a fresh flower and told him it matched his eyes. The sound traveled through the house like sunlight through old curtains. But joy is a dangerous thing in a place ruled by fear. That evening, Mama Duru stood at the top of the stairs, her eyes narrow slits. What do you think you're doing? Smiling, Luma said. The silence that followed was heavy. Mama Duru's lip twitched, and for a moment, it seemed as if something inside her faltered, a ghost of who she had been tried to rise. But bitterness was a stronger mistress. You'll undo everything, Mama Duru hissed. Luma stepped forward, the mirror's warmth still on her fingertips. Then let it be undone. And as she spoke, something shifted. The house trembled, a faint rumble echoing from the walls. A painting fell from its hook, revealing behind it a second mirror, long sealed with black cloth. The cloth unraveled on its own, revealing not Duru's reflection, but a dark shadow, twisted, joyless, barely human. Mama Duru screamed. The curse had been living in her all this time. Luma turned, rushing back to the attic. She knelt before the mirror, breathless. What do I do? Joy is not just for keeping, her mother whispered. It's for giving. Luma placed her hand once more on the glass. Then I will give it, even if it breaks me. And with that promise, the mirror glowed brighter than ever before. That evening, with the light fading into a bruised purple sky, Luma crept out of the attic with quiet determination in her step. In her hands were small, shimmering objects, shards of old mirrors, strips of polished metal, bits of broken glass wrapped in cloth to avoid slicing her fingers. She had been collecting them for weeks, ever since the mirror in the attic whispered the idea to her. Each piece held its own power, its own memory, its own echo of truth. She moved like a shadow, placing each shard with care. A piece behind the water jug in the kitchen. Another tucked into the wall crack by the sleeping quarters. A long metal sliver hidden in the sewing basket. Each one placed to catch the soft glow of moonlight that would soon pour over the compound. The house, once a place of silence and punishment, was about to become a garden of reflections. As darkness settled, a strange tension rippled through the air. Luma stood barefoot in the center of the courtyard, her palms open, her eyes steady. She whispered her mother's name and the names of all those who had smiled in secret, cried in silence, and been told their laughter was a sin. The wind stirred, light and cool, and with it came a hum. The shards began to glow faintly. Not with brightness but with a pulse, like the beat of a hidden drum. One by one they caught fragments of movement and memory. The cook, passing by the kitchen, glimpsed herself in the mirror shard behind the jug, and gasped. She saw herself as a girl again, dancing barefoot in the rain, free and loud. A tear slipped down her cheek before she even understood why. In the children's room, a small boy peered into a broken piece Luma had hung behind the curtain. Instead of his usual tired eyes, he saw them shining, alert, full of dreams. He saw himself painting murals across walls, laughing as colors spilled from his hands. The child blinked, confused, and touched the glass gently. "Is that me?" All across the house, these reflections awakened something ancient and pure. A girl paused in the hallway, saw herself reading aloud from a giant book while others listened. A gardener saw his younger self planting a tree with hope in his chest instead of exhaustion. Even the old cat meowed strangely, staring into a dish that caught the gleam of something it remembered from kittenhood. Luma watched it unfold in silence. She didn't need to smile. The smile had already taken root in everyone else. Then came the hardest part. Mama Duru. The woman who had banished all mirrors. The woman who slapped laughter out of children and turned joy into a punishable offense. She was walking slowly through the compound, disturbed by the strange stillness in the air, the quiet vibration beneath her feet. She stopped near the water jar where moonlight now fell like a blade. The mirror shard flashed. She caught her reflection. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then her breath hitched. She stepped back, but another shard caught her face. This one showed her younger, before the tightness had settled into her jaw, before her eyes became empty and cold. She turned to flee, but every direction held another sliver, another truth. She stumbled past the sewing basket and saw herself as a young bride, radiant and full of laughter. A memory flashed of a song she used to hum when she cooked for her first husband, a tune no one had heard in decades. Her hand flew to her mouth as if to trap the sob rising from her chest. She ran to her quarters and slammed the door, but there, hanging crookedly on the wall, was the largest shard Luma had saved. Mama Duru gasped. This reflection didn't lie. It showed her now hollowed, angry, alone. But behind her stood a girl with glowing skin, calm eyes, and the faint outline of another woman, the girl's mother, Luma. And behind Luma, 1,000 shimmering lights, like a river of ancestors flowing behind her. Mama Duru sank to her knees. The past pressed against her ribs, against her throat. She began to cry, not because she felt guilty but because she had forgotten she still could. Her tears hit the floor without shame. She cried for the girl she was, for the joy she lost, for the coldness she thought was strength. She cried until her chest loosened and something cracked open inside her, a place where light could enter again. Outside the house breathed. The wind stirred the garden. The leaves shimmered. The servants stepped outside, drawn by something they couldn't explain. Each face held surprise, recognition, wonder. Luma stood still in the center of it all, her hands raised, not to command, not to scold, but to gather. To receive. She saw them coming closer one by one. The children, the cooks, the old nurse, the boy with dreams, the gardener with tired eyes. Even Mama Duru, pale and trembling, eyes rimmed red. They formed a circle around Luma, uncertain but not afraid. In the attic, the original mirror pulsed with light. A voice, her mother's voice, echoed again. "You are the mirror now." And Luma understood. She didn't need to break Mama Duru. She didn't need revenge. She needed to reflect the light others had forgotten inside themselves. So she smiled. Not just at herself, but at them. And this time no one slapped her. They smiled back. Luma stood before the mirror, the attic now bathed in soft silver light. The cracked edges of the glass had long fused into one seamless surface, and within it shimmered a face more familiar than memory. Her mother's, no longer a whisper, no longer just a glimmer. For the first time in years, Luma saw the full image. Warm eyes, lips curled in a gentle smile, and a face etched with the same kindness Luma had always felt, even in her silence. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mama," she whispered, and the mirror pulsed with warmth. Her mother's voice, no longer hidden in echoes, filled the attic like a song. "You've done it, my child. You've broken the silence. You've brought light to this house again." Luma stepped closer. The air smelled like jasmine, like the old days when laughter danced in corners and sunlight lived in every wall. Her mother's reflection mirrored her movements, no longer distant but perfectly aligned. "I was trapped," her mother continued, "bound not just by death, but by the sorrow Mama Duru carried. She cursed these halls with her grief. It fed on your silence, grew in your stillness. But your joy, Luma, was the key. You chose to smile where no smiles were allowed. You sang in a house that punished music. You held on to love in a place ruled by fear. Luma touched the glass and her fingers met warmth instead of cold. I was so scared, she whispered. But I couldn't stop the feeling in me. It needed to live. Her mother nodded. That feeling is power. You have given life to what was withering. You have reminded this house and all who live in it what it means to be free. Tears streamed down Luma's face, not of sorrow but of release. She had never thought her defiance, so quiet, so small, would mean anything beyond survival. But now the walls that once echoed with silence trembled with change. Around her the attic seemed to sigh. The floor creaked with age, the beams above groaned, but none of it felt threatening. It felt like a house waking up from a long, painful sleep. Her mother's voice softened. I cannot stay much longer. My time was borrowed, bound to the curse. But now I go free, not because of death but because of you. And before I go, I leave you something. The mirror shimmered once more. A soft glow gathered at the center and condensed into a small silver object. It floated forward slowly as if carried by invisible hands and rested in Luma's palms. It was a pendant, a delicate smile carved into a crescent of silver, strung on a chain of light. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. This, her mother said, is joy remembered. It will never let you forget what you've overcome. And when the world darkens again, as it sometimes does, it will remind you of the power that lives in your smile. Luma clutched the pendant to her chest. The silver was warm like a hug pressed against her skin. I don't want to lose you, she said. You won't, her mother replied gently. I am in every mirror now. In every flower you bloom. In every laugh that fills your lungs. I am in you, Luma. A final breeze swept through the attic, carrying the scent of old roses and morning dew. The mirror shimmered once more, then began to dissolve. Not into shards but into dust. Silver dust that danced in the light like stardust or memories. It swirled gently, kissed Luma's cheeks and settled across the floor before vanishing completely. The attic was quiet again but not empty. The silence now held meaning, echoes of what had been healed, what had been freed. Luma stood there a while longer, her hand curled around the pendant, her heart still humming. Then she turned and walked down the attic stairs, not as the silent girl she had once been, but as someone new. In the hallway, servants paused to watch her. Some smiled. A child offered her a flower. Mama Duru was nowhere in sight. Luma walked to the main hall and opened the windows wide. Sunlight flooded the room, illuminating every dark corner. And then she laughed, not to prove anything, not to challenge anyone, but because she felt like it. And somewhere in the wind, just faint enough to make her pause, a voice whispered, "That's my girl." The house no longer whispered sadness. Gone were the days when its windows were dimmed by dust and curtains drawn like mourning veils. Now, sunlight poured through open panes, gilding the wooden floors with warmth. Wind danced through the hallways, carrying laughter, not silence. And above the highest beam of the once ominous roof, a wide mirror shimmered, set just beneath the sky. Years had passed since Luma's smile had shaken the walls. Since the last time her mother's spirit had appeared in silver light. Since Mama Duru, broken by the reflection of who she'd become, vanished from the house like a forgotten storm. What remained was the girl who dared to smile in sorrow, and what she built from it. Luma had grown, not just in years but in presence. Her eyes still held that quiet curiosity, but her spine stood straighter now, her laughter rang deeper. She no longer tiptoed through corridors. She walked with purpose. The house, once known in whispers as the place of silence, now bore a new name across villages, the Sky House. Children arrived with hollow stares and stitched lips. Women with bruises hidden beneath layers of cloth. Old men who had forgotten the sound of their own voices. They came seeking food or shelter but stayed for something they could not name, until Luma gave it form. Joy. It began with mirrors. Luma placed one in every room, each enchanted with the last magic of the attic mirror, now gone but never lost. These weren't ordinary mirrors. They didn't just show faces, they showed light. The glimmers of a dream remembered. The strength buried in sorrow. Some even claimed they saw their younger selves smiling back, urging them to remember who they were. In the mirror of the west room, an old woman saw herself dancing barefoot under a mango tree, something she hadn't done since her wedding day. In the mirror by the kitchen hearth, a mute boy saw colors swirl in the air as he stirred a pot, colors that soon shaped into music, guiding his hands into rhythm. Word spread like a sunrise. One evening a girl named Ija arrived. Her steps were hesitant, her voice barely a breath. She had not spoken in 3 years and no one knew why. Luma took her hand and led her to the main hall, where the largest mirror stood. It was rimmed with vines that bloomed with every genuine laugh shared in the house. "Just look," Luma said softly. Ija stared. For a while she saw only herself, worn, thin and tired. Then the mirror shimmered. A soft scene unfolded. Ija dancing as a child with her father, spinning wildly in the rain, her mouth wide in laughter. A tear slid down her cheek. And then she whispered hoarsely, "I remember." The house listened as it always did. A rose bloomed near the mirror. Ija's voice grew stronger each day. The sky house became more than a home. It became a threshold. People crossed it and left behind weights they didn't know they carried. Luma guided them not with sermons or chants, but with simple truths. A shared meal, a quiet walk to the attic, a mirror held up to the heart. Every person who found healing left something behind. A poem scratched into a beam, a smile carved into a doorframe, a silver pendant hung on a nail. Some carved suns into the window panes, others painted stars on the floorboards. The house became a reflection of all who had rediscovered themselves within its embrace. One afternoon a traveler arrived. He was cloaked, worn by time, and carried a sack filled with broken trinkets. He stayed silent for 2 days. Then on the third day he stood before Luma. "This place," he said, "was once feared." She nodded. "Now it reflects the sky." He smiled. "How?" She took him to the attic, now open to all. Sunlight streamed through the ceiling, and in the center stood a tall pane of glass, clear and whole, yet rippling with silver veins. It was the last remnant of the old mirror, protected in a frame carved by the house's residents over the years. "I don't fight darkness," Luma said. "I reflect what's hidden beneath it. The joy we're taught to bury. That's the power Mama Duru tried to erase." The man touched the glass. A child's laughter echoed faintly. His shoulders shook, and for the first time in decades he wept. Outside, the villagers often gazed up at the house. On sunny days, the mirrors caught light and reflected it like stars. On rainy days, the windows shimmered with memory. The house seemed alive, growing, glowing, evolving. Not because of magic alone, but because of belief. The belief that joy could be reclamation. That a single smile could shift generations. Luma would often sit by the front steps as evening fell, watching children chase shadows and old women hum forgotten songs. Around her neck, she still wore the silver pendant shaped like a smile, warm against her chest. Once a child asked her, "Is the house still magic?" She chuckled. "Only as much as you are." And in that moment, the wind laughed through the trees. The house exhaled. And in every mirror, a quiet glow sparked to life.